Kansas is trying to pass a wholesaler license law. We are going to give Rick Davis 5 minutes to tell us what's going on because there was a meeting today. So we're going to see what happened, what's going on and what happened, and how we can find out more information. So I'm going to hand the mic over to you for a few minutes, Rick.
The worst thing to do is to give an attorney a microphone and say you've got 5 minutes. I think none of you have anywhere to go today, right? So, okay, I'm going to talk real quick about the licensing law. If anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in. I think I'll start with this to say that I think the general consensus, which kind of matches my opinion, is this isn't really going to do a whole lot or stop what they're probably trying to stop, if they even know, which I'll get to that in a second, but aren't necessarily fighting against it. So if anyone here is against it, I'll say no one has spoken as an opponent thus far in the Kansas legislature, and so I would recommend that you try to do that as soon as possible. And so that brings us to kind of the recap of where it is. And so what the law is it's going to require that anyone who deals in assignable contracts, I think that's pretty close to the exact words that it uses there. It does not use the term wholesaling. If you are familiar with the licensing law right now, as I'm sure Rich is, it says there's similar language right now that deals with options. It's adding on to that. And so it says if you're dealing with the purchase and sale of real estate or the purchase and sale of real estate options, now it's going to add to it, or deals in assignable contracts, you are required to get a Kansas real estate license. And so that's pretty much the gist of what the law is. Where it's at, it was introduced actually last year with a few more actually penalty provisions and things. Did not get anywhere. It was dead on arrival. It was reintroduced this year as a little stripped down bill. It still has some of the things that were in the previous bill, like the ability to do a cease and desist order or to send an order to someone saying you can't do this unless you get a license, but it doesn't have some of the subpoena powers that were going to be granted to it last year. This year, it's taken a very interesting path because when it first came up, I talked to a few lobbyists that I know and said, what do you think about this? And they go, oh, it's not going to go anywhere. We're not hearing anything. We expect it won't. Then I was actually in Topeka at the State House a few weeks ago, right before it was going to have a hearing with the Senate, and I met with several members of the legislature who told me the exact same thing. Their exact words were, we haven't even heard anything about this. It's not going to go anywhere this year, or I would have heard about it. Well, that changed, and that's what happens in politics. And so there was a particularly one legislator who wanted to push it forward, ended up getting it heard at the very last minute as an emergency action last week for the Kansas Senate. It did pass out of the Kansas Senate with only 2 senators voting against it. It's now in the Kansas House, which gets to where we were today. This afternoon, the Kansas House committee had a hearing on it. There were only 2 people that spoke. They were both in favor of the bill. It was the head of the Kansas Real Estate Commission and the head of the Kansas Realtors Association. Well, yes.
They like money.
I didn't say it, you did. And so, but I agree. And so, yes, it would increase revenue because they're licensing more people. And so, the quick summary, I probably already used like 4 of these 5 minutes, but is that what I took away from that hearing is no one really knew what they were doing or what they were regulating, including the Real Estate Commission. They were better. They at least understood the basic concept of what wholesaling was. The members of the House didn't at all. And so there was a lot of skepticism. If you just watched that hearing, you probably wouldn't think it would go anywhere because there were a lot of questions like, what problem is this really trying to solve? What is this doing that other laws aren't doing? And there weren't great answers to those questions, but no one spoke against it. And so at the end of the day, if someone pushes one of those legislators, it's probably going to pass similar to how it did in the Senate because no one is against it. And so that's kind of the recap in a nutshell. Again, they didn't really understand it. One House member brought up a sub-2 situation, which isn't wholesaling, but talked about how he was talked to a constituent who had sold their property sub-2 and didn't know it, so they went to buy a property down the road and they still had a mortgage. That's a whole other issue, and it's a straight-up fraud. There's plenty of laws that would address that right now. Licensing isn't going to fix that, and it's also not wholesaling. The other thing that I think was known, and then I'll just stop and see if anyone has questions, is that Eric Wiseman, the head of the Kansas Real Estate Commission, was talking, and he said, we've seen a real uptick in complaints about this. It's really become a hot button issue. We're seeing a whole lot of complaints. And so I love it. One of the legislators asked, well, so how many complaints have you seen? Yeah, I think we got 15 to 20 last year.
Wow.
I don't know what you all consider a lot of complaints. I don't really consider that a lot of complaints to be moving a new law. But anyway, I'll pause at that. That's basically the summary. Like I said, there didn't seem to be a lot of interest. It was pretty lukewarm, tepid at best. But if no one's going to oppose it, and there's some people that are going to push it hard, it probably will go through. So if you do care, that's your warning. Any questions before I go back to Kim?
So as long as you have a license, you can legally carry on.
Yes, and Eric was specifically asked that question today of, if you have a license, can you wholesale? I personally don't necessarily think it's as clear, but he said yes. And
If
so,
the broker will allow it.
if your broker will allow it, ultimately that maybe goes to what Rich hinted a moment ago, that it's more about getting people licensed and paying
Yeah, I
fees
guarantee.
than it actually is stopping anything, because they're saying you can do all of this if you're licensed.
Just they know they're about to lose a whole bunch when the market shifts.
So that's the update. Oh, in the back.
How long do we have to oppose it?
So it's in committee right now. I would start reaching out to legislatures quickly, because we don't have that long before it would probably be voted on.
What's the
They did not vote today. They
What's
just
the
took
bill number?
information.
You know the
So
number?
SB 382. That was a good question. I should have said that earlier.
Well, that's Senate. What's the House bill number?
It's the same number because it originated in the Senate. And so, and if you go to the Kansas Legislature website and search for SB 382, it'll show you where it's at. You can actually view today's testimony or last couple weeks ago testimony in the House, that kind of thing. All right, thanks, Kevin.